No matter what corner of the world you are in, there is one universal truth. Every village has a terrifying story about a man or woman that murders people in a macabre way. Such stories can be found in China and Australia, in Brazil or France. No matter where you go, you will always find a killer that horrifies the listeners with their grisly deeds. However, out of all the anecdotes you can come across, there is one that has recently caught the attention of social media. It is the case of Joseph Ball, the second son of a family of 8 siblings who grew up in Elmendorf in the state of Texas. Would you dare to know the horrible crimes that Joseph committed to his victims? Then join us and discover the story of a killer who threw his victims to alligators. Joseph Ball was never a friendly child. Those who grew up with him remember him as a withdrawn young man who enjoyed long walks in the mountains and intense fishing trips with no other company than his own solitude. He maintained this personality throughout his whole life, but when growing up, he fell in love with 3 things: guns, wild animals, and women. Back then, the United States was at open war with Germany. It was 1919 when Joe returned from the army, ready to build a new life in Elmendorf, though no one imagined that he had terrifying plans. After several failed attempts, Joe opened his own business. It was an illegal tavern where he sold bootleg liquor. This made him very popular in a short time, plus he had a good amount of money that allowed him to continue expanding his ideas. Joe was very lucky during those days. Life and money were smiling at him for the first time, and that attracted many women to his bedroom. However, at the end of Prohibition, his big business collapsed. He ran out of customers overnight and had little money to face the crisis, so he bought some land on the edge of the main road in a desperate attempt to build a new, much larger bar. The move worked out well for him. He regained some customers and his finances began to improve. Joe had a great life in this tavern, but his plans gradually became more ambitious. In the mid-1920s, he invested money to create an artificial lake surrounded by 3-meter-high fences where he displayed 5 live alligators to attract new customers. Thus, overnight, Joe's Tavern became a big attraction even for outsiders, with no one noticing that something strange was about to happen. Around this time, Joe began to hire young, pretty girls. He chose them himself, and always selected those who stood out for their generous breasts, seductive smiles, or any other distinctive trait that would seduce customers with a simple glance. The first Joe's girl was Minnie Gothard, a 22-year-old whose nickname was Big Minnie. According to witnesses, she had an affair with Joe. They assisted the customers together and were very close, at least until Joe hired Dolores Goodwin 2 years later. She was a much younger and hotter new waitress. However, this wasn't new. Joe was known for having short-lived affairs that kept his suitors spellbound with love until they left with broken hearts. Mysteriously, from time to time, when Joe met a new victim of his love affairs, his current partner would magically disappear. He would come up with all sorts of excuses and strange devices to talk about those women, but no one could ever confirm their whereabouts, not even the waitresses who lived in the village. However, the alarm bells went off when in 1938, Big Minnie's family arrived in the village, trying to find their missing daughter. The parents started to ask questions because they were trying to trace their daughter's steps, but every clue led them to only one person, Joseph Ball. Joe was never reluctant to cooperate with the family members. He spoke with them in a pained tone, provided all the necessary information, and seemed too calm to arouse suspicion. But everything changed months later when the police went to the tavern with the family of Julia Turner, another of Joe's waitresses, who had also been listed as missing. Again, the authorities were unable to find a single piece of incriminating evidence against Joe, but he was certainly the prime suspect. Women went to his tavern one day, fell in love with him, and when he wanted to get rid of them, they disappeared without a trace. It was clear that he was the common element on all occasions, but the way he acted had yet to be revealed. The sheriffs of the county did not rest a single day. They were always on the lookout for a misstep on Joe's part, and it came in 1938 when one of the bar's neighbors called the police to report that he had seen Joe cutting up pieces of human flesh to feed his alligators. Bexar County Sheriff John Gray responded to the call and immediately noticed a violent attitude on Joe's part. He instantly called for backup, and John Clevenhagen arrived 20 minutes later to assist him in an inspection of the tavern. As it was a public establishment, there was no need for formalities or inspection warrants. There were some irregularities in the tavern, and by taking advantage of them, both officers began to inspect the establishment until they came across something that paralyzed them. It was a huge container full of meat pieces cut in large cubes, which were probably human. Joe would later claim that it was the food of his alligators and that it was not, under any circumstances, human. However, when the sheriff asked him to accompany him, Joe asked for a few minutes to close the business. John Gray and John Clevenhagen waited for him outside the tavern, but they were vigilant in case he tried to escape. However, such an act never came. What did happen was a thunderous sound of gunfire emerged from the second floor of the tavern. When they reached the room, they found Joe's body with a hole in his skull. Hours later, when the forensics team and specialized patrol from the Texas Zoo arrived on the scene to take the alligators and inspect their habitat, the discovery shocked the entire town. Human flesh residue was found everywhere, both in the lake and in the basement of the house. It was impossible to know the number of murders Joe committed, nor who his victims were. But for many, it was not too difficult to deduce. Joe had murdered a large number of women and then got rid of their corpses by throwing them as food to his alligators for decades, without anyone noticing until that day. Like this story, there is a large number of serial killers whose macabre minds have horrified entire cities. Their stories are the reflection of the most perverse and terrifying minds. And you can learn about them if you dare to join us in the following videos.